This is an NJN News special report. Governor McGreevey's State of the State address.
Hello, I'm Kent Manahan. Earlier today, Governor McGreevey delivered his State of the State address in Trenton. The governor laid out his agenda for the next year. He spoke to a joint session of the state legislature gathered in the Assembly chambers at the State House.
Thank you. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chief Justice, members of the Supreme Court, distinguished members of the legislature, honored guests, fellow New Jerseyans. A week ago, this address had a very different opening, but nothing I have encountered in this past year has personally shaken me as much as the human tragedy we witnessed this past week. The failure of government in this instance to safeguard the health and welfare of these 3 children is beyond excuse. It's sickening. We have no more fundamental obligation than protecting those who cannot protect themselves. I will not come before you and defend the status quo because it is indefensible. Nor will I tell you that this problem can be solved with quick and simple solutions. The problems at DIFAS have existed since its creation. These are difficult jobs in the most trying of neighborhoods and circumstances. But I will not accept that as an excuse for failure. We are blessed that in Commissioner Harris, we have an individual with experience and credibility to bring real change, needed change to this agency. I'm asking for the legislature's help to make DIFAS work for our children. This tragedy must remind us every day of our obligation, whether protecting the weakest child, the frailest senior citizen, the struggling families. We only succeed when our shared purpose is making their lives so much better. The job ahead of us is very clear. We face a deficit approaching $5 billion. Congestion and sprawl threaten our quality of life. Auto insurance continues to frustrate New Jersey residents. Our schools must meet new challenges while teaching timeless lessons. If we are to take on these issues and restore the quality of life that has made this state so great, those of us in public service must be prepared to answer 2 simple questions about our actions. Who are we willing to stand up for, and who are we willing to stand up to? A year ago, for instance, we said that we wouldn't balance our budget on the backs of hardworking families. At that time, even before we could sit at our desks, we said it was time to stop spending money we didn't have on projects we could ill afford. From day one, we took responsibility for our future through a series of hard choices and tough decisions. Within 6 short months, we faced a single overriding and all-consuming problem, a $9 billion deficit, the largest in our state's history. I can't help but be reminded by what John F. Kennedy noted within a few months of assuming the presidency. When we got into office, Kennedy said, the thing that surprised me the most was to find that things were just as bad as we've been saying they were. Well, during the economic prosperity of the 90s, the state unfortunately went in an unprecedented spending spree. that brought about short-term gratification at the expense of sound fiscal policy. A decade of surplus dissolved into record deficits. But despite unprecedented levels of government spending, we were unable to provide basic services to our citizens. For all the spending, DMV was left with an antiquated computer system, unequal to basic security and customer service needs. For all the spending, E-ZPass system didn't work and was $469 million in debt. For all the spending, literacy and early childhood education were virtually ignored. For all the spending, auto insurance fraud enforcement fell, and good drivers could not get car insurance. And for all the spending, environmental enforcement was gutted. Government spent your money, but it didn't stand up for you. From my first day in office, I said we were going to restore fiscal responsibility to the state of New Jersey and be a government that lives within our means. And we did. We balanced the budget without raising the sales or income tax. We provided needed property tax relief to working middle-class families and expanded property tax relief for our seniors. And like many families across New Jersey, we took advantage of low interest rates, refinanced the state debt, and saved over $60 million. We kept spending below the rate of inflation, and we maintained state aid to school districts and municipalities. And we restored tax fairness by eliminating loopholes in the corporate business tax that allowed 30 of the 50 largest employers to pay only $200 a year in taxes. We proved together that if we work together, we can make our state better. Well, it didn't always go as smoothly as I would have liked. I broke my leg. I had some other missteps. But where I come from, people admit their mistakes, learn from them, and move on. So I want to acknowledge and take responsibility for my mistakes, because too often people in government don't. But please, don't believe for 1 second the cynics or critics who say that nothing has changed in New Jersey. Just go to Karen Yuan's first grade class in Burlington County and see the impact that a reading coach like Judy McGonigal is having. And Judy is here with us today. Judy. Ask a parent whose child is enrolled in one of the book clubs we created. See the excitement in a little girl's eye and ask if we've made a difference. Visit one of the 81 criminals arrested for document fraud at DMV and see if they think Trenton's attitude has changed. Talk to the officials at Parsons who run the state's auto emissions testing, who had their contracts slashed by $17 million a year, and ask them if Trenton has become more demanding. Ask the E-ZPass contractor we fired and replaced with a competent and nationally recognized E-ZPass operator if the status quo is still acceptable. Ask the son or daughter of a victim of 9/11 if having a scholarship fund and free tuition at New Jersey state schools has made their burden a little lighter. And Senator John Bennett deserves our praise for his leadership on this important achievement. And this year, to honor the memory of Trooper Scales, will provide for the Law Enforcement Officer Memorial Scholarship Program supplemental funding. And I am very much honored that his widow is with us here today, Lisa Scales, and her father, Shank Podesta. Ask the gun lobby, who finally saw their stranglehold on Trenton broken when we passed the first child-proof handgun law in the nation, if the safety of citizens has finally prevailed over the power of special interest. Senator Cody, Assemblyman Weinberg fought tirelessly for this legislation, and publicly, New Jersey owes them gratitude. Ask the thousands of commuters who for the first time can find a clean, available seat on New Jersey Transit or a parking space if government has made their life a little better. Ask law-breaking polluters whether we've put Trenton's environmental cop back on the beat with real enforcement and fines when you violate our environmental standards. Ask Rhonda Barry, a two-time breast cancer survivor who received treatment close to home in a world-class facility, who's with us here today. Thanks, Rhonda. Or a researcher who's finally getting support searching for new cures if state government is making a difference. My friends, make no mistake, we still face great challenges and government cannot promise to solve every problem, but we have begun to make life a little easier, a little better for New Jersey's hardworking families. We're meeting the challenges of new problems that were unimaginable just a few years ago. Under the leadership of Dr. Cliff Lacey, New Jersey is the only state with bioterrorism rapid response teams on call 24 hours a day. With the FBI and state police, we have trained over 1,000 local law enforcement officers in counterterrorism, and we're working with New Jersey business leaders to safeguard 110 most essential sites. And next year, we will begin installing a state-of-the-art intelligence system that will be shared by local police departments across our state. And once again, we've made protecting New Jersey's environment a priority. After 8 years of lax enforcement, we will no longer tolerate polluters policing themselves. We have collected more fines, more compensation for environmental damages in our first year than the prior administration collected in all 8. I joined a bipartisan coalition of governors and states to take the Federal Environmental Protection Agency to court to stop Midwest power plants from polluting New Jersey's air. If the federal government will not provide the leadership to protect the air we breathe, reduce pollution, and protect New Jersey's coastline, then we will. These are but the first steps in transforming the old Trenton into a government driven by common sense and dedicated to the common good. As a result, I can report to you that the state of our state is better today than it was yesterday and will be even brighter tomorrow. But my friends, if we are to create an enduring quality of life for New Jersey's families, then we must stand up and fight for New Jersey's future right now. Year after year, we've returned to this Capitol. We've talked about auto insurance. We've talked about education. We've talked about property taxes. At every turn, we've treated the symptoms, but not the root cause. But these are not separate nor distinct problems. They are a result of a chain reaction set off by uncontrolled development. For years, all over New Jersey, we thought if we built one more road, one more mall, one more housing development, our problems would be solved. The truth is, that is the problem. There is no single greater threat to our way of life in New Jersey than unrestrained, uncontrolled development. It's jeopardized our water supplies, made our schools more crowded, our roads congested, and our open space disappear. And the irony is that the very promise that this development would lower our property taxes has turned out to be false. In fact, the opposite is true. Runaway development drives up our property taxes. It doesn't lower them. We cannot, we must not, we will not let this trend continue. Because if we do, the very appeal that New Jersey has held for decades for aspiring middle-class families will evaporate before our eyes. At the dawn of the last century, President Theodore Roosevelt saw unchecked logging and development were desecrating our national landscape. He took on special interests and created a national forest system that preserved our forests from destruction and introduced an ethic of conservation. At the dawn of this century, New Jersey faces a similar and even more urgent challenge. Will we take on special interests and finally end the cycle of unchecked development which is destroying our quality of life? We must do this right. We must do this smart. We must do this together, and we must do it now. We must find the will to stop development that costs more than it saves, takes more than it gives, that diminishes our lives and degrades our surroundings. Every day in New Jersey, we lose 50 acres. We lose 50 acres to uncontrolled, thoughtless development. 50 acres every single day, which we will never get back. Now is the time to draw a line and say no more to mindless sprawl. We must make our government a force for change, rather than an instrument that is misused to enable more and more misplaced development. Here's how senseless development is in New Jersey. New Jersey is the most congested state in the nation, but under our laws, a local town cannot even consider the impact of additional traffic when it reviews new development. And here's another example of just how rigged the system is against our hometowns and communities. Wealthy developers use deep pockets and expensive legal talent to take towns to court if those towns dare to oppose their development efforts. They can effectively bully unwilling taxpayers and communities into submission. For too long, towns across the state with limited resources have been left on their own. I want to recognize Mayor Jay Weeks and Councilman from Lebanon Township. Mayor, Councilwoman, Mayor Weeks and Councilman Swan, they were bullied. They had no one on their side. Well, today, I'm proud to state they have the full legal weight of the state's Attorney General, and towns across this state will be given the legal firepower from our administration to fight development when they need it. Too often, the law doesn't allow communities to protect their own taxpayers, so I will propose empowering towns with legal and zoning tools to control and manage their future development. No longer will communities be forced to stand helplessly by while inappropriate, unwanted development occurs. No tool is more important to a mayor than the ability simply to say no. So I will propose allowing municipalities to impose a one-year building moratorium. The message should be absolutely clear. If you want to build in an overdeveloped or protected areas, we will do everything in our power to stop you. However, if you want to build and grow consistent with smart growth, then we will help you get regulatory approvals quickly and make sure the infrastructure is there to support you. That means we will have one state map that we will live by, and not $1 of taxpayer money will be spent to subsidize sprawl anymore. We will have rules and regulations that say no to development in all the wrong places and yes to development that works for our communities. The days of builders saddling taxpayers with the cost of overdevelopment are over. We will establish impact fees so that developers, instead of local taxpayers, bear the burden for the cost of added roads and new schools. Let me say, to those who profit from strip malls and McMansions, if you reap the benefits, you must now take responsibility for the costs. And we must recognize that the consequences of development don't end at the border of one town. If we're truly going to tackle development, we must look for regional solutions. It can no longer be acceptable to let one town develop as it pleases to the detriment of its neighbors. We must have a mechanism to plan and control regional growth. The answer isn't to create more layers of government, but to make county and regional planning authorities more effective, more professional. This should be part of a larger effort to work on a regional level to plan better, save costs, and share services. I want to thank particularly Majority Leader Roberts for his great efforts here. The answer to congestion and sprawl isn't only saying no. We must make our urban centers, our older suburbs, or rural towns more attractive and viable by redeveloping brownfields and steering infrastructure spending to these areas. And farmland preservation is vital to ensuring a way of life in our rural communities. I am committed to a goal of preserving 20,000 acres of farmland a year. However, open space is not just a rural issue. For too long, our suburban and urban park system has been allowed to deteriorate. Our state park system has not been expanded in 7 years. Thousands of New Jersey families are turned away from parks every year because of overcrowding. Today, I'm setting a goal of creating or upgrading 200 local parks and adding at least 2 state parks in the next 3 years. And we'll also plant 100,000 new trees across the Garden State. In addition, we must seize this moment to preserve one of our most precious and largest undeveloped natural areas, the mountainous highlands of Northwest Jersey. The highlands, which provides 1/3 of New Jersey's drinking water, is rapidly being consumed by sprawl. And if we fail to act now, the opportunity may be lost forever. I've asked Treasurer McCormick to reform the open space bonding process to stretch our open space dollars without increasing debt. We will be able to devote at least an additional $100 million over the next 3 years, fully a 15% increase for open space protection. The Treasurer also will implement a limited-time capital gains tax waiver for those landowners who sell their property to our open space program, creating a new incentive for conservation and effectively lowering the price for the state to buy threatened land. I know what I have outlined here will not be easy to pass. There will be vested interests lined up across this state and outside that door to oppose us. The pressure will be enormous, but we cannot turn back or postpone this battle any longer. It is a fight that will define and shape the New Jersey we leave behind for our children and our grandchildren. It is a fight that will define who we are, what we stand for, and who we are willing to oppose. It is a fight New Jersey must win. Even as we fight to shape the future landscape of our state, we must also focus on those issues that have strained our cost of living for too long. Our auto insurance problem didn't occur overnight, and it won't be solved overnight, but we have begun to fight back. Starting from our first day in office, we took on the problems of insurance fraud and uninsured motorists that have driven up rates for good drivers. We have more than doubled the number of defendants charged with fraud, more than doubled the number of guilty pleas entered, and more than doubled the number of fines from the previous administration. We've cracked down on unscrupulous insurance companies. We've begun aggressively investigating the companies that refuse to provide insurance under the law. We created a team of insurance specialists to help citizens find affordable auto insurance. And we've recognized that uninsured drivers increase rates for everyone. Through our Last Chance program, under the leadership of Commissioner Bakke, nearly 20,000 previously uninsured drivers are now legal. We will have zero tolerance for those who cheat the system, and we will create a new crime of insurance fraud with mandatory penalties. These efforts are merely the first actions we will take to reverse the years of neglect and short-term decisions that made the crisis worse. There is bipartisan legislation pending in the legislature intended to make a number of substantial improvements in our marketplace, reduce regulations, and create more competition. This is a long overdue recognition that the auto insurance crisis is no longer simply about rates. It is also about accessibility. We must act before it becomes impossible for good drivers to find insurance. I would applaud Chairman Baer, Assemblyman Greenwald, Senator Bocco, but I also believe that our responsibility goes beyond the improvements to the marketplace. We must ensure industry responsibility, basic consumer protections, and stop the policies that force good drivers to subsidize bad drivers and the uninsured. We will create more choices to push down rates, empower consumers with more information, and demand accountability from both drivers and insurance companies. When I talk about good and bad drivers, let me be clear. Almost 94% of all the drivers in New Jersey have fewer than 2 points on their license. It is a small percentage of the truly bad drivers who force the rest of New Jersey to pay for their indifference. Under this plan, the winners are the 9 out of the 10 good drivers who deserve a break. Drivers who commit fraud must pay higher rates, and companies must be allowed to cancel policies that were obtained through false information. Bad drivers with more than 6 points should pay higher premiums than good drivers with 0 to 4. For the uninsured who truly can't afford the high cost of premiums, we are creating a new $1-a-day basic policy to increase access and cut down the number of the uninsured. And I am also prepared to work with the legislature to improve the regulatory environment and attract more companies to our state. We're going to reform regulations that are driving companies out of New Jersey so that New Jersey has more competition, not less. I'm tired of hearing ads for affordable car insurance that end with the line, "Not available in New Jersey." Over the past 10 years, Trenton's bureaucracy has ruled with red tape instead of common sense. Today, more and more companies are threatening to leave the state. Companies are entitled to a basic certainty so they can operate with confidence. I won't guarantee companies the answer that they want, but I will guarantee that they get a timely answer. We are willing to make the regulatory road smoother, but insurance companies won't get a free ride. Every consumer should be given at least 3 different rate and coverage options. We'll also provide report cards that detail customer satisfaction so that New Jersey consumers can make an informed decision. Too often, consumers are paying for coverage they no longer need because they've never been given a choice to update their policies. And we must no longer allow insurance companies to cancel coverage if a payment is mailed out on time but received 1 day late. Our agenda is a balanced approach to a long-standing problem. We owe the drivers of New Jersey quick legislative approval of auto insurance reform. But we also need to reform the DMV bureaucracy that has frustrated New Jersey drivers for decades. We've squandered enough time in acting on the recommendations of the bipartisan Fix DMV Commission. It's time. It's time to fix a broken agency that represents state government at its worst. It's time to give New Jersey citizens the security that is required by hiring additional police and more investigators. It's time to give drivers the service they deserve by starting Saturday hours and improving customer service. I want to commend Speaker Series and Senator Sacco for their tremendous and gutsy leadership on this issue. This isn't a partisan problem. It should not be a partisan issue. But for those who stand in the way, respectfully, I ask them to explain their actions to all those who now stand on DMV lines across this state. And the issue which is closest to my heart, education. At my inauguration, I said I would serve to be an education governor. A governor such as Thomas Kean, who made literacy a top education priority in New Jersey. For if a child can read, the world is an open book to his or her mind. But if they cannot read, that child will never reach his or her fullest potential. And if any child in New Jersey doesn't make it, neither will the rest of us. So I'm proud that we've kept the first step in that promise by putting reading coaches in 80 of our elementary schools, and by starting the Governor's Book Club and supplying copies of these books to schools. We're encouraging our children, every child, to develop a lifelong love of reading and learning. This year I hosted teacher town halls across New Jersey, and I know that our educators want to be the best teachers in America. I listened to parents from every part of the state who rightfully demand the most competent and highly skilled teachers for their children. New Jersey has an abundance of excellent teachers, but because there are never enough of them, we are working with our colleges and universities with Commissioner Librera to implement uniform standards for teacher preparation programs. And starting in 2004, we're raising the grade point average required to meet teacher certification. According to a report issued by the respected Education Trust, 1 out of 8 high school classes in New Jersey is taught by teachers without even a college minor in that subject. That is unacceptable, and it must change. We will work to insist teachers be certified in the subject matter that they are teaching. And New Jersey will continue to work with our corporate partners to develop high-quality summer programs for reading, science, and math teachers to help our educators be the best, which they so desperately want. We also must be prepared to break with past policies and embrace new ideas that force our educational system to meet the challenges of the future, even in our highest performing schools. Take, for example, the senior year of high school. For many students who have already met graduation requirements, that year is little more than a rest stop before graduation. It is a waste of time for many students and a waste of our money. So I proposed for those students who test out of required classes, we offer alternatives, meaningful alternatives of college-level coursework, community service, work-study internships, work which will better able prepare them for their future. And as we're all aware, many of our schools are severely overcrowded. This past year, we cut red tape to begin nearly 900 school construction projects throughout the state of New Jersey. And in little more than 20 years, 1 out of every 2 jobs in New Jersey will demand computer literacy. We've already updated our curriculum requirements for technology. And to make sure our young people are ready to compete in this new economy, we will start a technology proficiency test that will be required for a high school graduation. And we also must have the vision to ensure New Jersey's preeminence in education, science, technology. Now is the time to restructure our state public research university into a world-class system. An integrated university system will strengthen the partnership between the university and the private sectors in developing technologies and will be an engine of future economic growth. It will attract the most capable faculty, the most promising research, while strengthening the communities that surround our state university. I particularly want to acknowledge Dr. Roy Vagelos for his tremendous leadership on behalf of the state of New Jersey. And we also live in a state that is undisputed capital of pharmaceutical and biotech research. It is a home to world-class healthcare facilities. Yet, while we produce drugs that save the lives all across the world, too little medical research into new therapies is conducted within our borders. That must change. With new partnerships between government, the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare industry, it will. Every hour, 2 people in our state are diagnosed with cancer. Yet, the majority of cancer patients must leave New Jersey to get the best treatment. That's why last year we invested $20 million in research at the Cancer Institute of New Jersey. For the first time, New Jersey is directly supporting the scientists working towards a cure for cancer. We've developed a special tumor registry so that every New Jersey patient diagnosed with cancer will have greater access to state-of-the-art clinical trials through a network of hospitals and oncologists. We've created SWAT teams to respond to suspected cancer clusters. In the next budget, we will build upon these investments, but we can start now by passing legislation to promote needed stem cell research to be done here in New Jersey. If we are to work to find a cure for our citizens suffering from diabetes, Parkinson's, spinal cord injuries, we must have the courage to promote this research here in New Jersey. While we have changed Trenton to focus more on common sense and the common good, I'm also proud to have a cabinet as talented, experienced, and as diverse as this one. But as we have changed how government operates, we must now change how government behaves. Under the leadership of Attorney General Sampson, we've started to aggressively deal with the scourge of public corruption that has tainted too many public officials in New Jersey. We've already combined the State Police Corruption Unit with the Division of Criminal Justice to create a new Special Prosecutions Unit dedicated to rooting out public corruption. I am instructing General Sampson to reassign additional investigators and resources to the Office of Government Integrity and begin screening state contractors so that unqualified or corrupt contractors do not receive state dollars. Last year, I strengthened the ethics and financial disclosure requirements for all those who serve in the executive branch. It is time to hold the legislature to the same high standards. We can't have partially open government. That's why I propose extending the Open Public Records Act to cover the state legislature. I will also propose tightening disclosure requirements and stricter conflict of interest rules so that the legislature has to live by the same standards and the rules applied to the executive branch. Let me be clear, to prevent conflicts or interests, real or perceived, at all levels of government, elected officials should be barred from taking action on any issue in which they have a financial interest. I support pay-to-play reform, but let me be very clear. I will not support nor will I sign legislation which fails to address the conflict in every branch at every level of government. I will veto any bill that does less. My friends, we cannot solve every problem, and we certainly cannot fund every request. But we should be optimistic about what we can achieve together. I say this to every member of my administration and to this legislature, Republicans and Democrats. Our job is clear: enhancing the quality of life for those men and women who get up early every day, work hard, and play by the rules. It's for them, their children, their parents, that we must create opportunity, build stronger communities, and take more responsibility for the future of our great state. There will be battles ahead. There'll be tough medicine in dealing with the budget, maintaining fiscal discipline. The special interests will fight our efforts and test our commitment to stand up for the people we serve. We won't be able to do all we want, but we must do all that we can. Yet, for all the problems we will deal with this year, if we don't begin to stop overdevelopment, the greatest threat to our quality of life, we will not begin to live up to our obligation of making the lives of our families better. It's a problem that we've talked about for years. It's a problem we've tinkered with around the edges. But it's also a problem that we've effectively ignored in the hopes that miraculously it would resolve itself. But it hasn't, and it won't. If we continue the way we have, it will only get worse. Our roads will get more congested, our schools more crowded, our open space will entirely disappear, our property taxes will continue to soar, and the very fabric of New Jersey, of our communities, will unravel. We must have the courage here to do what has never been done before. If we do this right, for generations to come, the people of New Jersey will look back to this time and this place and say that is when our leaders stood up for the people and fought for our future. They will say that this was the moment when leaders pursued a shared vision and a shared obligation to stand up for those who dream of a better quality of life and stood up to those who would destroy it. If we do this right, we will truly leave this state a far better place. Ladies and gentlemen, the people of New Jersey sent us here to do a job, to fix their problems, and to stand up for them. I need your support, your wisdom, your courage, and your commitment Together, we will succeed. Thank you, and let's get to work.
You've been watching a rebroadcast of Governor McGreevey's State of the State address. When we come back, we'll have the Republican response to the governor's speech. Welcome back to NJN's rebroadcast of Governor McGreevey's State of the State address. The governor delivered his speech to a joint session of the state legislature in Trenton. NJN senior political correspondent Aron hosted the Republican response to the governor's speech.
I'm joined by Senator Robert Singer of Lakewood, in the 30th Senate District, and Assemblyman Tom Kean, Jr. of Westfield, the 21st Legislative District. Assemblyman Kean expected to soon be the senator from that district.
We're running for it, yes.
Senator Singer, your overall feeling about this State of the State address?
Well, a long speech. I think he touched, though, on a lot of issues that affect all of us in the state of New Jersey, and I'm pleased to see that. Though his response to some of those issues we have to question. Let's take the number one issue. He talked about automobile car reform, auto insurance reform. Major issue in the state, something he campaigned on. It's a year later, we haven't done anything. I reached out to 6 of the 8 largest insurers in the country and said, why aren't you writing in New Jersey? They gave me a laundry list of things they needed done before they consider coming to the state. One of them is, if they don't like it, they want to be able to leave. Nothing in the governor's speech talked about that. He talks about little fixes like the $1-a-day insurance plan. There's been an insurance plan for 4 years that said for $250 you can drive legally in the state. He claimed there were 600,000 drivers uninsured in the state when he ran for office. You mean in 1 year we only found 20,000 of them? The truth of the matter is it's going to take major reform. The insurance don't trust us. They want to see the laws passed for the willing to come in. And unless we attract 4 or 5 of those in Lawrence Insurance come back in the state of New Jersey, we cannot write insurance for the people of the state.
He did say, I heard him say, we're going to smooth out the regulatory road. One assumes that the objections the companies you were speaking to have about New Jersey were the things he was referring to when he said we're going to smooth out the regulatory road.
I wish it was that easy. If it was that easy, we'd pass the bill tomorrow. They want major reform. One thing he hasn't even talked about, and asked the insurance commissioner she's not talking about, is they want to be able to leave the state of New Jersey when they want to leave and not have to go to this exaggerated program where they take some years to leave. The state doesn't want to do that. They're talking about other situations where they're saying insurance carriers have to offer more programs. Right now, insurance carriers claim they offer more programs, but they can't make money in the state of New Jersey. I'm saying it's major reform. I'm willing to support major reform, but it's a tough pill to swallow. Is he willing to swallow that pill?
Assemblyman Kean, your overall thoughts on this address?
Well, I think he touched on a lot of issues that were important to people in New Jersey, but he didn't offer any real solutions. A lot of sound bites. He has yet to learn how to reach out with the olive branch. I don't think he's quite mastered that tack yet. It's all, we need to work together in a bipartisan fashion. And some of the initiatives that he's talking about have been Republican initiatives. On the anti-sprawl initiative, for example, I know that I, for one, and Senator Bagger, my cohort, have had efforts to stop development on border of towns. Regional entities have a chance to stop that development that impacts their citizens, and the administration and the Democratic majority hasn't moved on in over a year. He has actively stopped, in my district, a regional effort across 10 towns, spreading across 3 counties, to protect the Great Swamp Watershed Refuge, that whole area. And his administration has actively opposed bills, my legislation, to allow these people to stop the sprawl in that region.
Why? Because it's Republican legislation?
Well, I think primarily because it impacts the builders.
But he took on the builders today in the way I haven't heard.
Talk for a second. This is major fundraiser. Charlie Kushner, he just appointed to the Port Authority. Major builder in the state of New Jersey, one of the biggest builders in the state. His number one fundraiser. But he has appointed Dave Steiner to the Port Authority today. Dave Steiner, major developer in the state of New Jersey, one of his biggest supporters.
But I don't think I can recall a governor taking on the builders as directly, in rhetoric at least, as this governor did today.
I agree with you. There's a lot of good rhetoric in the speech. But what we need now is to see what the action is. We've got 5 months left in this legislative session until we close out the budget year at the 1st of July. And we need to see which one of these initiatives and proposals actually gets turned into law. I mean, you can have, this is a great campaign speech, and you can say you can fight for this, but the legislative session ends at the end of June. Let's see what, the entire year we have not had this. We've got a tough budget cycle that we will be approaching. We've got a lot of issues, not only ones that he's touched on, but other ones that are impacting the people of the state that go beyond these issues that we need to focus on in the coming months and years.
He said, let's allow towns to put a one-year building moratorium in if they wish to. Is that a good idea?
If the courts will let us do it. I don't know if the courts will let us do that. You know, we've tried that in the past. But let's talk for a second what he's talking about. No one is questioning we want to stop overdevelopment. We want to help the traffic, the sprawl. But you know what? We're talking about trashing the Continental Arena and making it a shopping mall there. Is that going to help out traffic in that area? We've taken millions of dollars from the Port Authority that they're going to overpay for leasing Newark Airport to build an arena in Newark, where you could have taken some of that money, which they've done in the past, for economic development statewide. You know, there are a lot of issues here left off the table. Talk about malpractice. I've got doctors trying to talk about leaving the state, striking they're talking about in our state.
He doesn't
even mention malpractice. Because you know why? The tough road there is we're talking about tort reform, and he won't touch it. Tort reform is a key factor in that. Let's not discuss that.
Let's stay with sprawl a bit longer. Do I hear you both saying that you agree with the vision set out today? You just doubt whether the commitment is there to implement it? Is that what you're saying?
I support giving mayors more control of development in their own town. I mean, Mount Laurel has been a real problem for people I know in my community, and I know my father opposed the Mount Laurel decision when he was governor. But what we need to do is ensure that communities have more control over what happens in their town. And so we need to go and combat the builder's remedy and other things like that, and so that these towns and these municipalities can control their growth better.
Impact fees are a great idea. I support that. No question about it. You create more traffic, you create more kids in the schools, you should pay for it. There's a whole host of good things he's talking about, but my real concern is who's backing him, who's supporting him. The builders, he sounds good, but does he really mean it?
Didn't the legislature pass impact fees a couple years ago?
We passed a modified version and never made it through the Assembly.
Okay. Auto insurance, Assemblyman, Senator Singer thinks that he didn't hear enough today on auto insurance. Certainly not enough to attract companies back into the state or keep companies in the state. How about you?
Well, we certainly congratulate legislators for their hard work on this initiative, but I never heard that he supported the bill. Does he support these initiatives to reform? Does he actually truly have a plan for where we need to be in the coming months and the years for the people of this state? I didn't hear that he supported that plan.
It was a little vague. I know that the newspaper articles have been saying that he wants to redefine what a bad driver is. And he did use a number, 94% of the drivers will pay no more under his plan. We'll shift more of the cost to people with 5 and 6 motor vehicle points.
But in 1997, when he was running for governor, I think he supported the take all comers and wanted to make it stronger, and now he's backing off of that initiative. It was one of his plans when he was running for governor in 97. Now he seems to have turned a corner on that a little bit. I haven't heard a direct plan on this initiative, and it's an important issue.
I think we have to look too is, do you think 3% or 5% of the drivers are going to pay all the additional money? It's just not going to happen. What the problem really is, we've got to attract more companies into the state. There's no other solution but that.
If we attract more companies into the state and make it better for companies, does that mean it's worse for policyholders? They'll have to pay more, or can you have both?
The insurance market, whether it's car insurance, whether it's malpractice insurance, and homeowners insurance, nationwide is having problems. Why? Take a look at the stock market. When they could take their insurance dollars that you were paying into premiums and invest it for higher returns, premium were lowered. Today they can't do that. Premium rates are going higher. 9/11 changed premium rates for a lot of different industries. The fact really is, insurance companies say, if we're going to be overregulated in any state, we're not coming in. We've got to be willing to understand what that means to us. You're right. In the short term, there might be, might have to bite the bullet. In the long term, you'll see lower rates. But if we don't attract 4 or 5 of the largest insurers back into our state, we can never solve the car insurance problem. We're going to play the domino effect of trying to do something, but really not doing it.
Assemblyman Kean, you're the sponsor of the pay-to-play legislation that Governor McGreevey referred to at the end of his speech. The legislation, as I understand it, would say that if you want to do state work, you no longer can give to a political party or a political candidate. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's a pretty radical reform, isn't it?
Well, it's an important reform, because I think the people of the state, especially over the course of last year, are unsure about what people are getting for their dollars when they pay in the campaign structure. And this bill was introduced before Governor McGreevey became governor. This is not an anti-McGreevey initiative. This is a good, strong, bipartisan initiative. It passed the Senate by 35-1. I've had a hard time and working very hard to get out of committee. I had to overrule the rule of the Speaker to get it out of the committee and onto the Assembly floor. And then we were supposed to have a vote on it yesterday, and they canceled the session. This is a bipartisan effort for good, strong, clean campaign finance reform, and what the governor announced today is nothing but a delaying tactic. To change its form now, when it's 3/4 of the way through the process, we can have this bill signed into law in its current form in 2 weeks. The next legislative voting session is the 23rd. You can sign it on the evening of the 23rd, and then we can come back and say, okay, if we want to make it stronger or impact local and county governments, let's do that. I will help lead the charge. But let's get this done. Got a marker in the sand, say this is a token of good faith. This is a good first step. Let's move on to that and then do the next steps.
He did say that he supports the concept, but let's do local and county government at the same time that we do state government. You're saying that's a delaying tactic?
Nothing but a sad delaying tactic. It's important that we move forward on this reform. It's gotten through 3/4, if not more, of the legislative process. All he needs to do is sign it. And then, if he has actually looked at this effort, he can take a couple weeks, look what we can do at the next steps. But my fear is that we can be talking about this through the end of July, and which means it will not become law, and that will further erode the public's confidence in the ability of government to reform itself.
I said that this was a somewhat radical reform. It may reflect my 20 years down here of seeing political campaigns primarily underwritten by the engineering, law firm, developer community. Who's going to finance political campaigns if you take everybody who does work with state government out of the business? Maybe we'll see fair
campaigns where you're not seeing big dollars roll over candidates. Maybe people are going to have to raise money from the people supporting them. We don't have a problem with that. I mean, the issue really goes back to what do we want to see? We want to see people not buying their way into government. We want to make sure by giving big money doesn't mean you're now the attorney for the governor. You're now the sweetheart contracts. Nobody's against that. You know, he turns it around and says legislators shouldn't have conflicts. You know, this is not a full-time job. Does that mean lawyers can't vote on any law because they're affected in? I'm in the hospital industry. Does that mean I shouldn't vote on anything for any hospitals? Tell us what you want, and we'll be more than willing to do it. But understand, we're a part-time legislators, and 99% of us hold other professional jobs. I mean, I don't know what his conflict is going at. He has to tell us more about it.
We also have, I mean, when he says that we don't have strong conflict of interest laws, well, we do have strong conflict of interest laws, and people say, and people abstain from votes all the time. I mean, there's an issue that impacts you in your private sector life. The legislators certainly abstain from that initiative, but I think that's differing from the point here. Let's get not only pay to play. I'm supportive of it on legislative as well as on county municipalities. But let's get the executive branch to take the first step, the good faith effort to push forward and get this done. That's true ethics reform. And let's see if government can reform itself. And that's what we need in the next 2 weeks.
Let me ask you what I asked Senator Singer. Who's going to pay for political campaigns then?
Well, I think a variety of people. I mean, I think we'll reach out and try to fundraise from the people of this state and get out there. Not everybody who contributes to candidates receive contracts from the state government. I think that's not the case. You reach out, you have, events, you meet people, you say, this is what we need to do, this is my vision. And if people share in your vision, they will support your candidacy because they're fighting for good government. And it's not only fighting for where government should be, it's where it ought to be, it's where we ought to be, it's not where we could be, but it's where we should be better as a state, and that's what we need to fight for, and that's what I fight for.
Share one thing. I know time is fleeting with us. There's one issue he touched on was education and reading. He's a reading governor. We all support that. That's a wonderful asset, and I praise the governor for that. But the one thing he didn't talk about was funding for schools. In half the state, or 2/3 of the state, where school populations are growing, where we're building new schools, where our school budgets are increasing, we're going to be flat funded again, we believe, this year. To that is an absolute raise in property taxes to senior citizens and young families that can't afford that. Now, let me say one thing. The governor ran on a policy saying he was willing to support a state convention to decide how we're going to refund education in the state off the back of property tax owners. Now he says, put that on the back burner. It's a year down the road. He won't even call for it. Let him call for a state constitutional convention to talk about this issue. It's a key issue to the seniors of our state, to young families in our state that cannot afford continual rise in property taxes by flat funding education.
Just to add on that, I support a stronger Office of Governmental Integrity. I think that's an important reform. But nowhere in the speech did we talk about streamlining government. Nowhere in the speech did we talk about reducing either obsolete or duplicative levels of government.
He did say at the beginning of his speech in reviewing his first year that we've restored fiscal integrity to government. We increased spending lower than the rate of inflation.
That's just not true. That's not true. We had a $21.6 billion budget last year. We've got a $23.6 billion budget this year. That's a 9% increase in spending. And that meant that you had a tobacco bond that had to be pushed through, that is bonding, which the governor opposed during his campaign. We increased the business tax that impacts every single family in this state on small businesses by over $1 billion. We increased fees for over $70 million this year. Nowhere did we talk about reducing the size of government and reducing duplicative efforts by government, whether on the state, the county, or the municipal levels. And that's an important next step.
You want the last 15 seconds?
Just that we appreciate the fact that the governor touched on the key issues, but we want to see, as they say, where's the beef?
All right, and they're going to say, how would you cut state spending to put more money in for schools? But we don't have time for the answer unless you can do it in 10 seconds.
Let's talk about some of the money the Port Authority is spending on the arena.
All right. On that note, Senator Bob Singer and Assemblyman Tom Kean, thank you both very much. This has been the Republican response to Governor McGreevey's State of the State address. I'm Michael Aron in the Assembly chamber. Back to you, Ken.
And that concludes NJN's rebroadcast of Governor McGreevey's State of the State address. I'm Kent Manahan. Thank you for being with us.